Hello and welcome to the Engerati studio here at Itron Utility Week. Sorry, I've projected a bit too much. My apologies to everybody passing. We're joined now by Christine Richards, who's the Director of Research for ZPRYME. Christine, firstly, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for making the time to be here. And you've been taking in all of the conference. Unlike me, I've been stuck here. And we were talking a little bit off air, and there are a few narratives that we'd like to explore here today.
Yeah.
And one of them is sort of what you feel, and we'll come on to it in the context of the interview, the role of utilities for driving innovation and also not just driving innovation for the sake of it, but driving it to a destination, which is this next generation of energy. Can you tell us a little bit more about your position on that?
So my position, position within ZPRYME or within the bigger picture there?
Just for the bigger picture.
Okay. All right. So my position on the bigger picture of what's going on, I think we heard about it this morning with Philip Measy and Russ Vanos, and they were talking about all the change that's been happening in terms of technology, the Internet of Things, and it's really starting to grow into this bigger picture of smarter cities, and bigger connections across a lot of different industries. And there are questions out there of who's going to drive that change. Where is that change going to come from? And there are a lot of people that are out there, a lot of different organizations. It could be cities. It could be, technology companies, something like a Tesla that comes in and drives that change. But there's really a lot of opportunities for utilities to come out because they have been making investments in technology already, through smart grids, things like that. And
so I get that, and we have a similar conversation, and you can probably tell I'm not from the US, so we have a similar conversation in Europe, where it's just like, hey, look, and sometimes it feels like Groundhog Day, where we're saying that the utilities are best placed to drive that innovation and so on. And to me, that reporting that the utility has been happening for some time. Now, what's the inertia? Why do you feel? What needs to happen in order for that to take a leap? Is there more technology that still needs to be brought in, or why are we still talking about the utilities grasping this opportunity?
Well, I think a lot of it is just the structure that has been set up for utilities, where a lot of times, they've operated within the electrical grid or the water network, and that's their area of expertise. That's where they sit and where they know what they know best. And so the regulatory structure has been set up that way. So that creates a little bit of inertia in terms of being able to move to that next level and start thinking beyond those investments that companies have already made.
And what do you think you'd like to see in that thinking of beyond? Because there are two things, right? And we see it here within Itron as well. There's a very bold move and say, okay, well, this is what our core business does incredibly well, but we're going to set up, and we'll interview the gentleman in charge of running it, and we're going to set up Itron Labs, and this is where we'll then start doing the innovation. Is that sort of construct the one that's the best for utilities as well? Because the day business is about being a great project manager and operational efficiency, not necessarily being innovative and breaking things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, utilities obviously operate mission critical environments. They can't have the grid going down. They have to deliver reliable power and resources. And so, technology companies have that opportunity to help introduce additional innovation, really challenging the industry to start to look at what's next. But I think it was interesting. I was in a session earlier with Jason Handley from Duke Energy, and he said, as a utility, we've been operating in this certain environment, but our vendors and technology providers have sort of come to fit that mold, right? Kind of siloed systems, proprietary approaches, and that's the way that it's generally gone. So now it's this opportunity for really both of those groups to start rethinking things of how they can start to move to what's next and really start to innovate.
So when you rethink things, you sometimes do it for two reasons. You sometimes do it because everybody's telling you to rethink things and you're running around like, well, I'm rethinking things, but why am I actually doing it? That could be one area. And when we were talking off air, you also touched on another area. It's just like, how do you reconcile? So when you're innovating, let's say you're at the bleeding edge, you're a startup, or things go wrong, you fail.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile those cultures with a sort of mission-critical environment? No one is going to thank any utility in the world and say, oh, we spun this app up, it didn't work, sorry, your water wasn't running for 6 hours, but we're innovating, right? That's not the reward curve.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's that opportunity to really take some time to do, some good experiments. And again, with Duke Energy, they were working on developing a microgrid, so they have, a site where they're doing that, and they're experimenting, and they're working out those kinks. And also just building better resiliency into the grid, so, some of these things, are going to be working well, and if they don't, then other systems can pick up, and so there's that redundancy and resiliency that gets built in.
So do you think the opportunity is, you mentioned microgrids, is in the ability to now create sort of containerized test beds like that? Because a microgrid can be mission critical, but it can also be a test bed because all the elements of a grid are in there, but it's in a container. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's that container at least to get things started. But eventually, those microgrids are going to be, mission critical for these organizations. So I think it's just having that ability to be able to do some of that experimentation, to start to work out those kinks and realize that things are going to evolve. And
then. So let me move the conversation somewhere else.
Yeah.
Not to come out of it from left field, but again, we were talking about it off air. What was very interesting for me is, there was a piece you wrote about sustainable electrification, but then what was equally interesting is the fact that you wrote a report from South by Southwest about the electricity conversation happening there. And I'm going to use the word tribe, right? Because I've been to South by Southwest. It's a very different tribe.
Yeah.
So there are two things that were really interesting for me about that piece. One was that tribe is taking an interest. And the second one is how passionately that interest resonated at that event. What do you think is going to happen when that tribe starts colliding with this one?
I mean, I think it's actually a really exciting time in the industry to see utility companies that are really working to deliver reliable energy with, like you said, the tribe. I mean, people that are kind of out there thinking about these different things and thinking about what's next. And what you see with that tribe is that they have a lot of really great ideas, but sometimes it's, well, how does it actually work within the context of the utility industry? But at the same time, that tribe can really help pull utilities to say, okay, well, let's start thinking a little bit differently about this and thinking about what's next. So, I mean, there's a really great intersection that happens, when those two groups start to come together. And I think there are going to be some interesting dialogues going on.
Have you seen any of that dialogue? Have you witnessed it? Because one of the other things is like, you talk about art and design in energy, and that is sometimes, that's a strong statement where you're like, well, this is an engineering thing. It's about straight lines and boxes. Where does the art and design fit in? So, where are you coming from when you mention those words?
Well, I think with art and design and energy, there's the art piece and the design piece. So the art piece is really kind of that expression of a feeling or an idea to an audience. And I think that's where, energy really, communicating that information, whether it's to customers, to people who aren't a part of the energy industry, or maybe they are, and it helps them view energy in a little bit different way. That's where the art piece really comes in. The design piece is really thinking about things, a little bit differently, where, as engineers, typically you're trained to, meet requirements, meet these standards.
Solve a very specific problem.
Solve that specific problem. And what we're talking about is not just, putting in a meter or putting in a transformer. We're talking about rethinking the entire utility system and energy as we know it. And that's where having that design perspective, being able to introduce creativity and imagination is a really important thing to have in that picture.
Do you think that is more likely to be accelerated by what I call the democratization of energy? Right? So let's look at an event horizon here. So we're both in the same field. We know what's happening with PVs and the efficiency and the affordability. We know what Elon Musk is doing with Tesla and the Powerwall. And I was reading a report recently which was like top 50 utility execs, and they say energy storage behind the meter is the single most disruptive thing that's coming out. Do we need for all of that to tip before we start seeing this explosion of creativity around this sector? Because at the moment, it's still somewhat centrally controlled, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I was doing a session down at Centerpoint Energy in Houston a couple months ago, and I listed out those disrupted technologies, right? Storage, Internet of Things, microgrids, solar, all of that, and someone for my list, they crossed out energy storage and they said, let's put in Elon Musk there, and so it wasn't even about the technology necessarily that. Really is driving that change. I mean, it's people and organizations and, that excitement that's getting built around these. That's really a big difference.
And is that where the South by Southwest tribe comes in? Because you could put someone like Elon Musk into that mold of thinking, which is a very different mode of thinking, where literally it's a platform play, effectively, saying like if I create an initially artificial but eventually real demand for all these batteries, I can drive down the price, I can drive down the affordability. That's a very different way of thinking, that much more platform, much more actually cross-regulatory. Is that where the pressure is going to come?
I think just those new opportunities and people that if the utility industry says this is kind of our box and this is generally where we play, there are people that come in from the outside and say, okay, well, I'm not under those same, that same structure. I can think about it differently, and I'm just going to, maybe bypass a bit of that system that had been in place, and that's where a lot of that, I think that change. And you mentioned pressure, but it's kind of just that. Pushing along and getting people to think about things a little bit differently. That's important.
And you've been in the sessions this morning. I haven't, like I said, I've been up here. If I can give you somewhat of a different role as we kind of come to the end of our time here.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you've seen where you're like going, well, this really reaffirms my thinking, or your organization's thinking about how things need to change. We talked about art and design, but also you talk about the conversation with the millennial generation and so on. Is that coming through in those sessions?
I think that it is. I mean, I've come to Itron Utility Week. I've came several years ago to a conversation that was pretty much around the utility industry and what was happening here, and it was really exciting to see that in the keynotes this morning that they were talking about, okay, well, let's figure out how to build this platform to bring all these different devices, technologies, power producers, into this bigger picture of what we need to do to have a sustainable future. And then the same thing with Duke Energy, hearing the conversation this afternoon where they're working on making that happen. They're saying, okay, we got to figure out more open standards, getting all these different groups to work together. We can't just have these one-off solutions. We have to bring all these different partners together to make it work.
And when you then see all of that, just to get to the wrap here, because I know you've got a panel to go to, right? Yeah. So I don't want to have to make you run too much. where is the innovation there? Is it really at that edge? Is it at that interface? So, does the utility industry, and I see this in Europe as well, have an opportunity to be the platform of innovation? So they may not innovate, and I draw this parallel from London, where we had Transport for London opened up all of their data of bus times and everything on an open data platform. And we saw this explosion of apps and things that could tell you, like, down to it's like you still have time for a coffee before the bus arrives and all that sort of stuff. Is that one model where, this incumbent sector can be the custodian of the data, but the innovation is at the edge?
Yeah, I mean, I think that innovation is not, people always talk about it in terms of, here's the latest app, here's this new piece, new technology that you can plug in. It always has to be an app, right?
I
know, I feel like it does. But really the innovation, right, is getting everything to come together, making all that happen. So I think that, utilities can definitely be a part of that. They're not just that, platform that sits there for, other people to do really cool stuff with. They have the opportunity to help drive that change. So, I mean, I think that there are a lot of opportunities for utilities to drive innovation.
That's perfect, Christine. And on that note, we'll leave it because it'll give you time to go to your panel. And listen, you can turn the tables on me the next time. You've been a great interview. And thank you as well for watching. There's been another interview at Itron Utility Week in association with Engerati. Thanks again.